Edge of Mount Hood by Eleanor Hart. I never should have gone alone. That thought echoed in my mind as I stood at the edge of Mount Hood National Forest, the towering pines whispering in the wind like conspirators sharing secrets. It was late March, and the forest was still cloaked in winter's chill, the air sharp and biting. I had come here to escape, to clear my head after a messy breakup and a suffocating job. The wilderness felt like the only place where I could breathe freely. The trail I chose was one of the less traveled ones, winding through dense woods and leading to a secluded viewpoint called Owl Point. It wasn't my first time hiking alone, but something about this trip felt different. The forest seemed heavier, darker, as though it were holding its breath. I started late in the afternoon, hoping to catch the sunset at the viewpoint before heading back to camp. The trail was narrow and uneven, littered with fallen branches and patches of snow that hadn't yet melted. My footsteps crunched loudly, the sound bouncing off the trees. About an hour in, I began to notice something odd. Silence. The usual symphony of birdsong and rustling leaves had vanished. Even my footsteps seemed muffled now, swallowed by the forest itself. I paused, scanning the trees around me, but saw nothing out of place. Just endless rows of pines, stretching into shadowy obscurity. I shook off the unease and pressed on. By the time I reached Owl Point, the sun was sinking behind Mount Hood's snowy peak, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The view was breathtaking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That's when I saw it. A flicker of movement at the edge of my vision. Something darted between the trees below the viewpoint, too fast for me to identify. My heart thudded in my chest as I strained to see more clearly, but whatever it was had vanished into the shadows. Probably just a deer, I muttered aloud, trying to reassure myself. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. As darkness crept over the forest, I decided it was time to head back. The trail seemed different now, more sinister somehow, and every snap of a twig made me flinch. My flashlight cast long shadows that danced across the trees like specters mocking my fear. Then came the sound, a low, guttural growl that froze me in place. It wasn't loud, but it carried an unnatural weight that sent shivers down my spine. Slowly, I turned toward its source, a cluster of trees about 20 yards away, and that's when I saw them, glowing eyes staring back at me from the darkness. They weren't human eyes or animal eyes, they were something else entirely, luminescent orbs that pulsed faintly like embers in a dying fire. There were 2 at first, then 4, then 6 pairs emerging from behind tree trunks and bushes. Panic surged through me as I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my flashlight. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my attempt to sound brave. No response came, just those eerie eyes watching me, with an unnatural stillness that made my skin crawl. I turned and ran blindly down the trail, branches clawing at my arms and legs, as if trying to hold me back. The growls grew louder behind me, accompanied by heavy footfalls that sounded too large for any known animal in these woods. My lungs burned as I sprinted toward what I hoped was safety, my campsite. But when I burst into a clearing where my tent should have been, all that greeted me was emptiness and silence. Somehow, I had taken a wrong turn in my panic and ended up deeper in the forest instead of closer to civilization. The growls stopped abruptly as I stood there panting and disoriented, but the glowing eyes returned, this time surrounding me completely in a loose circle just beyond the reach of my flashlight's beam. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of cryptid? A supernatural entity? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion? The figures began to move closer now, not walking but gliding silently across the ground, like shadows given life. Their forms were indistinct but humanoid, with elongated limbs and faces devoid of features except for those haunting eyes that burned into mine, with an intensity that felt almost sentient, intelligent, predatory. I screamed for help even though I knew no one would hear me out here, not this far from any trailhead or ranger station, and then something strange happened. One of them stopped just inches from where I stood, trembling, and raised an arm toward me, as if beckoning or inviting me somewhere deeper into their domain, into their world, beyond comprehension or escape. I don't remember what happened next, whether I fled or fainted or followed, but when dawn broke hours later and sunlight pierced through gaps in the trees above me like golden swords banishing darkness itself, they were gone. All of them, leaving no trace behind, except for claw marks etched into nearby bark where they had encircled me during those harrowing moments before daylight saved me or abandoned me to whatever fate awaited beyond Mount Hood's cursed wilderness trails. To this day, whenever someone asks why I never hike alone anymore, all I can say is, some places aren't meant for us. Shadows in the Pines by Evelyn Harrow. I never should have come to Bridger Teton National Forest alone. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend of solitude, a chance to escape the noise of city life and reconnect with nature. But now, as I sit trembling in my tent, clutching a flashlight that flickers like a dying heartbeat, I realize how foolish I've been. The forest had seemed welcoming at first. Towering pines swayed gently in the breeze, their needles whispering secrets only the wind could understand. The air smelled of earth and pine resin, and the trails were empty save for the occasional deer darting through the underbrush. I'd pitched my tent near a secluded meadow, far from any other campers, eager for peace. But peace was not what I found. It started subtly. As dusk fell, I noticed an unnatural stillness in the woods. The chirping of birds and rustle of squirrels vanished, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I shrugged it off as paranoia, city nerves adjusting to wilderness quiet. But as night deepened, strange sounds began to creep into the edges of my consciousness. Soft clicking noises echoed from somewhere beyond the trees, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone tapping stones together. Then came whispers, low and unintelligible, carried on gusts of cold air that seemed to rise from nowhere. I told myself it was just the forest playing tricks on me. Exhaustion would explain it all in the morning. Morning brought little comfort. The meadow was blanketed in frost, despite the mild spring temperatures forecasted for the region. My boots crunched through brittle grass as I explored nearby trails, hoping movement would shake off my lingering unease. That's when I saw it, a figure standing motionless at the edge of my vision. Cloaked in shadow, it blended seamlessly with the trees, but its presence was undeniable. It didn't move or make a sound. It simply stood there, watching me. I froze, adrenaline surging through my veins as primal instincts screamed at me to flee. But when I blinked, it was gone, as if swallowed by the forest itself. I tried to laugh it off later as a trick of light or my imagination running wild, but deep down, I knew better. Something about this place wasn't right. Determined not to let fear ruin my trip, I ventured deeper into the woods that afternoon, following an unmarked trail winding through dense pines. The path led me to an unusual clearing, a circular patch of ground devoid of vegetation or moisture despite recent rains. It was unnervingly dry and perfectly smooth, as if something had swept away every trace of life within its boundaries. I stepped closer, drawn by morbid curiosity despite every nerve in my body urging caution. The air around the clearing felt heavy, oppressive even, a tangible weight pressing down on my chest. Then I saw them, footprints leading into the center of the dry spot, but none leading out. The prints were human, or close enough, but they were wrong somehow. Too long? Too narrow? I couldn't put my finger on it exactly. All I knew was that they made my skin crawl. As I stood there staring at them, a sudden gust of wind whipped through the clearing, carrying with it a faint but unmistakable sound: laughter. That night was worse than any nightmare I've ever endured. The clicking noises returned louder and closer than before, accompanied by guttural growls that seemed to vibrate through my bones. Shadows danced outside my tent, long and spindly shapes that didn't match any animal I knew. I tried to stay calm, gripping my flashlight like a talisman against whatever lurked beyond the thin nylon walls separating me from the darkness. But then came the voice, a raspy whisper that called my name over and over again. Anna. How did it know my name? When I couldn't bear it anymore, I unzipped the tent and shone my flashlight into the night. The beam illuminated nothing but empty forest, no shadows, no figures, nothing. But as I turned back toward my tent, I saw it standing just beyond the clearing's edge, a towering silhouette cloaked in smoke-like tendrils with glowing eyes that burned like embers. It didn't move toward me. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to paralyze me with fear. I didn't wait for sunrise. I packed up and fled as soon as dawn broke over Bridger Teton's eerie landscape. My legs burned as I scrambled down trails toward civilization, glancing over my shoulder every few seconds to ensure nothing followed me. But something did follow me, or at least its presence lingered in my mind like an unwanted guest who refuses to leave. When I reached my car, parked at a trailhead miles away from where I'd camped, relief washed over me like cool rain after a drought. But as I fumbled with my keys and opened the door, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. A shadow moved between the trees, not human-shaped this time, but something more primal, more ancient. Now that I'm home again, safe within 4 solid walls, I should feel better, but I don't. The whispers haven't stopped. They haunt me in quiet moments when no one else is around. Sometimes they're faint enough for me to dismiss them as tricks of memory or imagination. But other times they're loud enough to wake me from sleep. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see those glowing embers staring back at me. I've scoured online forums for answers, stories of similar encounters in Bridger Teton National Forest, but all I've found are vague legends about ancient guardians protecting sacred burial grounds or punishing trespassers who venture too far into forbidden places. Whatever stalked me in those woods remains a mystery, and perhaps that's what terrifies me most. Because some questions are better left unanswered. The Man by the Creek by Lila Grayson. I arrived at Lightning Creek on a gray afternoon, the kind where the clouds hang low and the air feels heavy with unspoken warnings. The restoration work in the area had been a point of pride for the locals, but I wasn't here for that. I was here to get away, to escape the noise of my life and the mess I'd made of it. The forest was vast and quiet, with only the occasional sound of water rushing over rocks to break the stillness. My plan was simple: hike out to one of the more remote areas, set up camp by the creek, and spend a few days alone with my thoughts. The first day went smoothly enough. The trail was rugged but manageable, winding through dense pines and past patches of moss-covered ground. By late afternoon, I found a spot near the creek that felt just secluded enough. The water was clear and fast-moving, and the rhythmic sound of it was oddly soothing. As I pitched my tent and gathered wood for a small fire, I noticed something strange: a pile of stones stacked neatly by the water's edge. They were arranged in a deliberate pattern, too deliberate to be natural, but I shrugged it off as someone else's handiwork. Maybe another hiker had been here recently. That night, as I sat by the fire eating a bland meal from my camping stove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The forest seemed too quiet, like it was holding its breath. Every so often, I thought I heard something, a faint rustling in the underbrush or the snap of a twig, but when I turned my flashlight toward the sound, there was nothing there. I told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. After all, solitude can do that to a person. The next morning, I woke early to find that someone, or something, had been near my campsite during the night. The pile of stones by the creek had been rearranged into a different pattern, a spiral this time, with smaller stones placed carefully inside it like some kind of offering. I stared at it for a long time, unease prickling at the back of my neck. It didn't make sense. No one else should have been out here this deep in the wilderness. But there it was, proof that someone had been close enough to see me and close enough to leave their mark. I decided not to let it bother me. Packing up my gear, I told myself it was probably just some eccentric hiker who liked making art out of rocks. Still, as I moved farther upstream to find another campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. By midday, I found another spot, a clearing surrounded by tall pines, with a view of the creek winding its way through jagged rocks below. It should have felt peaceful, but instead, it felt exposed. Vulnerable. I spent most of that day trying to distract myself, collecting firewood, filtering water from the creek, but every so often, I'd catch movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow darting between trees, or a flash of something pale against the dark bark. Each time I turned to look, there was nothing there. That night, as darkness settled over the forest like a heavy blanket, I built another fire and tried to convince myself that everything was fine. But then came the sound, footsteps crunching softly through leaves and twigs just beyond the firelight's reach. "Hello?" My voice sounded small and uncertain in the vast stillness. The footsteps stopped. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward where I thought they'd come from, but all I saw were trees and shadows. "Is someone there?" My voice cracked this time. No answer. For hours after that, I sat by the fire clutching my flashlight like a lifeline, every nerve in my body on edge. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me, and I crawled into my tent, leaving the flashlight within arm's reach. I woke sometime after midnight to find my tent unzipped, not fully open, but just enough for someone to peek inside. My heart hammered in my chest as I grabbed the flashlight and shone it outside. He was standing by the creek. At first glance, he looked like an ordinary man, tall and thin with dark clothes that blended into the shadows. But there was something off about him, something wrong. He didn't move or speak. He just stood there watching me, with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Who are you?" My voice came out barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. I scrambled out of the tent and backed away slowly toward the trailhead, without taking my eyes off him. "I don't want any trouble," I said shakily. Still nothing. Then he smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach his eyes, and pointed toward something behind me. I turned instinctively but saw only darkness, and when I turned back around, he was gone. The rest of that night is a blur, running blindly through the forest with no sense of direction until finally collapsing from exhaustion as dawn broke over Lightning Creek. When search and rescue found me 2 days later wandering near an old logging road miles from where I'd started, they said no one else had been reported in those woods recently. No other campsites found. No footprints except mine. But sometimes, late at night when everything is quiet, I still hear those footsteps trailing just behind me. The Stranger in Payette National Forest by Nathaniel Wren. I've always loved the wilderness, the way it swallows you whole and makes you feel small. Payette National Forest, with its sprawling 2.3 million acres of rugged beauty, seemed like the perfect place to lose myself for a weekend. I'd planned a solo trip, 2 nights, 3 days, just me, my tent, and the endless pines. The first day was uneventful. I hiked deep into the forest, leaving behind the well-trodden trails for something more remote. By late afternoon, I found a clearing near a creek where I set up camp. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the faint scent of pine, sap, and earth. As I cooked dinner over my small stove, I felt a rare sense of peace. That night, though, something changed. I woke to the sound of footsteps crunching through the underbrush. They were slow and deliberate, circling my tent. My heart pounded as I fumbled for my flashlight. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky in the stillness. The footsteps stopped. I unzipped the tent just enough to shine my light outside. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but trees and shadows. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was out there, watching me. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt around my campsite, large boot prints that didn't belong to me. They circled my tent twice before disappearing into the woods. I told myself it was probably another hiker who'd stumbled across my camp in the night and decided not to disturb me. But deep down, I knew that didn't make sense. What kind of person walks around someone's tent at 2 a.m.? I packed up quickly and decided to move farther into the forest, hoping to put some distance between myself and whoever, or whatever, had been lurking around my camp. The trail grew narrower as I climbed higher into the mountains, the trees closing in around me like silent sentinels. By midday, I reached an overlook with a breathtaking view of Hell's Canyon to the west. The sheer vastness of it made me feel both awed and uneasy, like I was standing on the edge of something far greater than myself. That's when I saw him for the first time. He was standing at the tree line about 50 yards away, partially obscured by shadows but unmistakably human, or at least shaped like one. He wore a dark jacket and a wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. He didn't move or make a sound. He just stood there, watching me. "Hey!" I called out, raising a hand in what I hoped was a friendly gesture. "Are you lost?" No response. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized how unnaturally still he was. No shifting weight from foot to foot, no movement at all, except for the faint rise and fall of his chest as he breathed, if he was breathing at all. I turned away for just a moment to grab my pack, and when I looked back, he was gone. The rest of the day passed in a haze of paranoia. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made me jump, convinced he was following me even though there was no sign of him on the trail behind me. By the time I set up camp that evening near an alpine lake, my nerves were frayed to their breaking point. As darkness fell, so did an oppressive silence that seemed to press down on me from all sides. Even the usual forest sounds, crickets chirping, frogs croaking, were absent, leaving only the faint whisper of wind through the trees. I didn't bother with dinner. My appetite had vanished, along with any sense of safety I'd once felt in these woods. Instead, I crawled into my tent and zipped it up tight like it could somehow protect me from whatever was out there. Sometime after midnight, I woke again, but this time it wasn't footsteps that roused me. It was humming. A low, melodic hum drifted through the air like an old lullaby sung just out of earshot. It wasn't coming from any one direction. It seemed to surround me entirely. Terrified but unable to resist, I unzipped my tent just enough to peek outside. He was there, closer now, standing at the edge of my campfire's dying embers. The firelight flickered across his face, or what should have been his face, but there was nothing there except smooth skin stretched tight over bone where eyes and a mouth should be. The humming grew louder as he raised one hand toward me in a slow, deliberate motion. I don't remember screaming. I don't even remember running, but somehow I found myself stumbling through the forest in total darkness with no flashlight or sense of direction. Branches tore at my clothes and skin as I ran blindly downhill until finally tripping over something, a root, a rock, and collapsing onto cold earth. When dawn broke hours later, he was gone. But so was everything else, my tent, my gear, even my footprints from where I'd run through soft soil. All that remained were his boot prints leading back into Payette's endless pines. What Lies Under the Black Hills by Elara Vance. The Black Hills devoured my truck whole, or at least, so it seemed. One second I was driving on the winding, almost non-existent logging roads. The next there was a rock slide, or whatever it was, that shot me off into the trees, burying my truck under the weight of soil and shattered wood. My mobile phone was dead, the sun was setting, and I was deep in the middle of the national forest, miles away from civilization. I walked down the narrow path that still existed. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wet earth, the only noises being the sound of leaves and a distant hooting of an owl. But it was not the silence of the natural world. It was a thick, waiting one, like the forest was holding its breath. As darkness descended, the trees became monstrous silhouettes, their branches stretching out like skeletal fingers. I relied on the beam of my flashlight, its one beam a thread of light slicing into darkness. I began to realize that there was something strange about it. Out of the side of my eyes, the trees moved, their shapes changing, their shadows elongating. And then I heard it, a slow, pulsing thud, a heartbeat, but too deep, too resonant to be human. It sounded like it was emanating from the earth itself, thrumming through my boots. I stood stock still, my own heart pounding, attempting to pinpoint the source. The thumping grew louder, and I perceived a faintly greenish light emanating from the ground of the forest, a soft, phosphorescent glow which appeared to pulse in rhythm to the thumps. The ground beneath me was strangely soft, almost spongy. I went on, driven by a frantic need to escape the growing fear. The trail led me to a clearing. Trees surrounded it in a complete circle, their trunks embracing each other with branches above, creating a natural dome. In the middle of the clearing was a broad, flat stone that pulsed the same eerie green light, the thudding resonating from within its depths. I approached cautiously, my flashlight beam trembling. The rock was covered in strange, swirling patterns, similar to petroglyphs, but unlike anything I'd ever seen. They seemed to writhe and shift in the pulsating light. As I got closer, the thumping was louder, and the green light more intense, illuminating the clearing with a strange radiance. I felt a pressure building in my head, a hurting, throbbing that pulsed to the beat of the thumps. The air was dense and heavy, difficult to breathe. And I saw it then. Someone, standing there in the shadow at the edge of the glade, towering and tall, with lost features in the dark, but its eyes afire with that same otherworldly green. It did not move, said nothing, but simply stood looking at me. I felt a wave of terror, an instant gut reaction that sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to run, but my legs felt heavy, rooted. The figure began to walk, slowly, deliberately, its movements silent on the soft earth. I backed away, the light from my flashlight splashing wildly around, illuminating the writhing patterns on the stone, the lighted eyes of the figure. The thudding reached its crescendo, and the green glow flared with blinding intensity. Then there was blackness. I awoke to the birds singing, the early morning light peeking through the trees. I was lying on the forest floor, a few yards from the clearing. The rock was nowhere in sight. It had vanished into thin air. The clearing was just an ordinary clearing. There was no thumping and no strange light, and the figure had vanished. I was able to crawl back to the road several hours later and eventually obtain assistance. The truck was discovered to be recoverable, and the police noticed that the rock slide was unusually odd, in that the earth was too firm and the surface too flat to have one. I told them about the rock, the light, the figure, but they dismissed it as a hallucination caused by exhaustion and fear. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I still see the green light sometimes, at the periphery of my vision. I still hear the thumping, soft but persistent, like a heartbeat echoing from the bottom of the world. And I know, deep down, that there is something ancient and wicked hidden under the silence of those bottomless pines, something waiting patiently for the unsuspecting to stumble upon its secrets. And I fear, more than anything, that I've only just scratched the surface of what lies under the Black Hills. Whispers in Chippewa National Forest by Clara Finch. I've always loved the solitude of Chippewa National Forest. There's something about its sprawling wilderness, thousands of acres of towering pines and shimmering lakes, that feels untouched, ancient. It's the kind of place where you can lose yourself, both figuratively and literally. That's why I chose it for my weekend escape. I arrived early on a Friday morning, the mist still clinging to the trees like a veil. My plan was simple: hike deep into the forest, away from the tourist trails, and set up camp near one of the smaller lakes. I wanted quiet, a break from the noise of my life back in Minneapolis. The first day was uneventful. The trail I followed was narrow and overgrown, but manageable. By mid-afternoon, I found a secluded spot by a lake with water so still it looked like glass. I pitched my tent under a cluster of pines and spent the rest of the day exploring the area. It wasn't until dusk that I noticed something strange: carvings on the trees near my campsite. They were small and crude, symbols I didn't recognize, etched deep into the bark. At first, I thought they might be old markings left by hunters or surveyors, but as I looked closer, I realized they were too deliberate for that. There was something unsettling about them, though I couldn't quite say why. They seemed wrong, as if they didn't belong here in this quiet, untouched place. I tried to brush off my unease as I settled in for the night. The forest was alive with sound, the chirping of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, but it felt different somehow, heavy, like the trees themselves were watching me. I woke sometime after midnight to silence, not just quiet, silence, the kind that presses against your ears and makes you feel like you're underwater. Even the wind had stopped moving through the pines. Then came the whispering. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of sleep-deprived senses, but as I strained to listen, I realized it was real. Low voices murmuring just beyond my tent, too soft to make out words, but unmistakably human. "Hello?" My voice sounded small and shaky in the stillness. The whispering stopped. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent just enough to shine it outside. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but trees and shadows. I didn't sleep after that. The next morning, I found more carvings, this time on trees closer to my tent. They were fresh. Tiny curls of bark littered the ground beneath them, like someone had been working on them while I slept. I should have left right then. Every instinct told me to pack up and go home, but something kept me there. A stubborn need to prove to myself that there was nothing to fear. By midday, I'd convinced myself it was just some local prankster trying to scare campers off their turf. But as evening fell again, so did my courage. The whispering started earlier this time, just as twilight turned the lake into a mirror reflecting the darkening sky. And it was louder now, closer. I stepped outside with my flashlight and scanned the trees around me. That's when I saw him. He stood at the edge of the clearing near a cluster of pines, a man dressed in dark clothes with his back turned toward me. His posture was stiff, unnatural, like he wasn't entirely sure how to stand upright. "Hey!" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. He didn't move. I took a step closer, keeping my flashlight trained on him. "Are you lost? Do you need help?" Still nothing. Then he turned his head, not his body, just his head, and looked at me over his shoulder. His face was pale and hollow-eyed, his expression blank except for a faint smile that sent chills down my spine. I froze as he raised one hand toward me, not in greeting but in some strange gesture that felt more like a warning or an invitation. And then he vanished into the trees without making a sound. I didn't follow him. I couldn't even bring myself to move for what felt like hours after he disappeared. When dawn broke over Chippewa National Forest, I packed up my campsite as quickly as possible and started back towards civilization without looking back. But even now, weeks later, I can't shake what happened out there by that lake, or what it means, or why those carvings followed me all the way home, etched into trees near my apartment building, where no one else could have placed them.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.